Hello.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, I can't hear you. Still can't hear.
Good morning. Rita will be late for like half an hour. She has a conflict. We can get started if everybody is here.
Yeah, we can get started. I'm not sure if Max has audio yet. He was saying he might reboot.
Let's wait for Max for a few minutes. Hey, can you hear us, Max? We cannot hear you. Did the reboot made it worse? No, we cannot hear you, unfortunately. I like your shirt though. Oh, now good. Yeah. I don't know what you did, but that fixed it. Say something. I think audio is gone again, the mic. So you can either speak or or hear us. No, his mic is gone. Yeah.
Well, while Max is rebooting or getting his laptop, can I steal your for a second to talk about the forking the script?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't get a chance to take a look at the PR again, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, just wanted to see like where you're at. After I'm not sure if you saw my comments, so maybe just
let me see where I left it off.
I can share a link in the chat.
Yeah, I just opened it.
I think this is where I started to like explain my thought process. Like I don't like pulling in like, I don't know, 2-3 other scripts as well, especially since we use like 1 or 2 functions from them. And by
I thought it was basically just like the simple source. And I'm sure there's like one random variable or something that gets used because of that.
Yeah, so there's a few that get used. Would you want me to try to like unsource these and see if something breaks, basically?
Yeah, it's just unsource them, I think, and then obviously you need to remove the kube Golang verify go version, and then the kube util ensure tempter. But other than that, I think it's fine.
Okay, Max had a suggestion to add a README about the SHA. So when I go back to that PR, I'll give this a try as well and report back.
Okay, I mean, you can just comment out those and then say these have temporarily been removed to reduce dependencies or something like that.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay. Yeah, Max, while you were running to grab the laptop, I was just chatting about the license lint PR a little bit.
Cool.
The other thing that I saw the other day, maybe we could also use, this is like a different idea. I'm just thinking out loud. There's a website called deps.dev. I think this also goes through the licenses. I don't know if it's something we want to use, but something to consider too.
I've not looked at deps.dev. I've looked at some other tools, and basically, like, if I may, like, distill the requirements, we just want to be CNCF compliant. And I think the allure of that script is that it does that already. It does that for Kubernetes. So
yeah, just pointing it out. I think as is, if it's working on Kubernetes, that's fine. Yeah, but this is another alternative that if you want to just query this like a website and then just get the information. I think they have like an API and everything.
It's like a database of licenses.
Basically, yeah. Yeah, I think they go out and then scan everything and they just collect stuff. Not just licenses, but also like the vulnerabilities, dependencies, like everything.
And what was getting removed? It sounded like something was getting removed when I got my audio back.
Yeah, if I may summarize, and let me know if I got this wrong, Shartaj. So some of these files, additional scripts like etcd.sh or golang.sh, maybe we can comment out some of the sourcing in some of the like small functions that they call, so that we can reduce the dependencies and like not change the behavior, like not break the script.
Oh, so we're just commenting out extra superfluous code in the dependencies, you're saying?
Yeah, I think if you commented out to line 30 and 31, which is the kube golang verify go version, kubutil ensure tempter, I think that would resolve most of the issues, I'm guessing. And obviously the source ones in 26 and 27.
There's like Golang, there's variables that are interfering with other stuff, or it's just causing it to break because it's inaccurate?
It's because it's sourcing another file, and then it's sourcing because it's trying to like verify Go version. So there's like another logic that's like in another script, and then that sources another script, and it's basically just like a cascading. Yeah, this
so
is
we're
Kubernetes build process.
Unused files is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, I mean they are technically used, but we just don't need them because we don't need to verify Go version, for example.
Yes,
Right.
technically they're all used. It's just we don't care.
Yeah,
They're used by the transitive dependencies, not by us.
Yeah.
They're not used for things we use, is I think what you're trying to say.
right.
Okay, cool.
And yeah,
Nice.
this is Kubernetes build process, which is like pretty complicated. There's like a lot of shell scripts. I'm familiar with this, so there's a lot of stuff you don't need in here. Yeah.
Yeah. At what point do they say don't use shell scripts? Do turn this into not a shell script?
Yeah, I don't know. It's very shell script driven. Yeah.
I definitely learned a lot of Bash looking into this. I was like, oh my God, here we go again. But I don't know how much return on that investment I'll get.
Yeah, and then feel free to chat with me, Alex, if you want to collab on Slack. We can also get on a call if anything is complicated and you need to pair.
Oh yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I'll give this a shot and call out if I'm stuck.
Oh, weird. Sorry, my video looks all squished to me, so that I'm like narrower than I should be.
Oh, it
But the
looks
feed
fine
looks
to me. Yeah.
okay. Cool.
Yeah, I can see the bookcase on your right and
Mhm.
most of the wall on your left.
Nice. Yeah, as long as it doesn't look like someone put a DVD player to like the wrong aspect ratio or whatever. Remember
Mhm.
when you did that?
Yeah. It looks fine. It's just a different angle because it's the laptop.
Cool. Thank you. Meeting notes, opening
Oh,
those.
so sounds like we were already going to talk about the forking discussion, so we'll put it to the first one. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's why I approached it. I was like, okay, let's get this out. Yeah.
Yeah, good idea. Okay. Jade, do you want to take us out with the pub sub again?
Yep. So as we talked last, I think we had three major questions open. One was that are there any missing brokers that Dipper doesn't support and are widely used? And I think in that call we reached to the conclusion itself that like it's pretty comprehensive list. So like the likeliness of something that is not supported by Dapper is very less, which is widely adopted. The second thing was that is there an inherent capacity of batching and what is the load performance? Uh, uh, I have seen an issue which is a P1 feature on Dapper repo, which is coming out in 1.10, which will have batching functionality. It's a very comprehensive. Let me just share screen. Easier. Yeah. Can you guys see? Oh wait, I think. Do you guys see the whole browser or just?
I see the tabs. So
Okay.
I see the browser window.
Perfect. Yeah, so there is this whole like really huge proposal which is basically tracking every subtask of uh, PubSub model, and I think it's going to come out in 1.10, which is the next version. I am not sure when it's going to be out, but they are on 1.9.5 or something, so I'm guessing this is going to happen pretty soon. So that's another question answered. Then looking at their stats, I think Dapper performs really well in the load test because like it consumes really less resources while accommodating 1,000 requests per second. So that's really good. Um, and
Do
then
do we need to have any of the Dapper components in the Gatekeeper deployment, or is that just like a add as a Dapper as a library?
uh, we we really don't need any gatekeeper deployment. Sorry, any component in the gatekeeper deployment if we agree that we are going to we are going to uh, document a list of uh, steps that user can follow on their own to use this functionality. Let's say like uh, we can just say that by enabling this flag you can use that, but we will not include any components or any deployment files. User would need to do that on their own, but we certainly could list out what to do, what components to install if they want to use PubSub. If
So
that is, sorry.
Oh, sorry. So just to be clear, Dapper does not work without a sidecar process.
I don't think so,
Okay.
or at least that's the tangent I'm on for. Almost like so. By injecting sidecar, Dapper includes that particular pod into its uh, PubSub workflow. So those yeah. So Dapper has to like include that sidecar container into a pod to make sure PubSub work for that application.
So we'll do need to change the gatekeeper if somebody say we
Yeah.
could make it like an if else in Helm chart, for example.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that part we need to do, but for
I
the
see.
component that are going to be installed as a dependencies, we might be better off not including them as a part of installation process of Gatekeeper.
Dependencies as in like the consumers, say like the Kafka or those sort of adapters.
Yes.
I see. Okay,
And-
but as far
and-
as the gatekeeper component, we do need the sidecar.
Well,
And then
We just need to add a label. Dapper injects sidecar on its own. So we just have to we will not modify any init container or container spec, but we'll just have an if else condition to add 3 required labels for Dapper, and then Dapper will handle injecting sidecar on its own.
not gonna lie, I'm not in love with the whole sidecar model. It seems to be the way things are going. I think Rita's comment is from last week is well founded that if we find a way to wrap this such that we can use other libraries in addition, this seems like a good starting point, because it does seem to be like the thing CNCF is focusing on. And if you look at I forget if it's Open Census or Open Metrics or whatever they're calling themselves now, they're also using the sidecar model. I mean, the difficulty with it is just needing to source the sidecar, right? You're sort of hitching your wagon to another product, which is not always a great thing. So yeah, we should make sure we don't hitch it too strongly, I guess is the right way of saying that.
Yeah, that's fair.
but
Yeah.
Dapper has a way to automatically inject the sidecar.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. So we don't have to necessarily add it, but then it will get injected.
Right.
see.
It's just a cluster that uses this would need to have Dapper installed.
I see. So they'll have the operator. That's the component that it mentioned in the docs, right?
Yeah.
I see. Okay. And then does it only can we say it, hey, only do this for Gatekeeper, or is it the user will need to configure that?
Sorry.
So we should. Sorry, I'm gonna say, to be consistent with how we've dealt with Prometheus and Cert Manager and all these other things, we shouldn't try to handle installation of core Dapper.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it should be a documentation only. Yeah. And then back to my question, can we have a annotation or something like that, or just have a documentation to have an annotation, so it'll only inject for Gatekeeper?
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
So one there is so right now there is a way to run everything in one pod, right? Like for Gatekeeper, everything audit, webhook, audit and webhook, and so the Dapper will inject the sidecar as long as any deployment has the labels. So we might be better off saying that, hey, if you want to do this PubSub for audit or something, please install audit independently so that any other application won't get affected of it. If that
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, and then the third question or the third topic we discussed was, is there any way to make it generic? So Dapper itself supports many brokers underneath. So it handles interfacing part pretty well.
Right. So this is what I think I was talking about Rita's comment earlier. The part where Dapper is not generic is it requires you to have Dapper, right?
Yeah.
Like Dapper has stopped being the self-contained thing and started being, well, now you need to extend your cluster with Dapper functionality. So when I don't think we could say then that Dapper itself provides the genericism, if that's a word. But how she had couched that comment was, can we wrap Dapper in something generic such that we could plug other like Dapper equivalents in if needed, or users or people who are forking our project can easily do that without too many lines of code. Like ideally, like 1 or 2 lines of forked code plus some extra files to support whatever the thing they actually want to use is.
It should be possible because like as long as the PubSub functionality goes, it's just a bunch of sequential execution. Let's say you create a channel, you create a publisher and create a subscriber, right? And most of the times, like the tools that I looked at has the same methods, but I cannot say for sure without doing some interfacing myself that it is possible, because that there is bound to be some differences. Like I looked at Prometheus and Open Census and how it was done. And looking at it, I can say that yes, it is possible, but I don't know the difficulty details to come up with a situation where I can say it's not possible. So.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely some like interfacing work and some like careful comparison of the APIs. But it seems plausible to me. And when you say you looked at the Prometheus stuff and the Open Census stuff, you're talking about like what Gatekeeper did?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Something similar to that for sure. I don't think this is like like a plausibility concern. I think it's like fairly plausible, but I think in terms of how we design it, we should start off trying to define that interface, because it's going to be a lot easier to start with it than to try to like refactor things to add it in later.
But again, like when you say a Dapper like tool, what do you mean? Like all the others tool I compared to only CubeMQ seemed like a Dapper equivalent. Any other tool that I looked at was a broker essentially that was supported by Dapper itself.
So I think that a Dapper-like tool means just any library designed to help you communicate with a queuing service, right? So that could be a single queuing service, or it could be like Dapper, and it could be like however many queuing services, right? And so now I'm like just speculating, but there's going to be probably some command for sending a message, right? And some sort of way to establish like which queue that message should be posted to, probably some tagging of that message. Those are like the big 3 that I would imagine, right? Because mostly what we're doing is we're generating events. I don't think we're contemplating consuming events, at least not yet, right? And so I would like kick that can down the road. And maybe something like a constructor or something like that, because what's going to happen roughly over time is we're probably going to start with a flag, right? Like send audit events to a messaging queue or some object in the config resource or whatever, right? And so when that gets loaded, we're going to want to set that up. Then once we get like enforcement actions, like non-trivial enforcement actions, people are going to want to configure this per constraint, right? So we know we're going to need some sort of operational flexibility to define and alter these over time. Maybe, once we, something like more advanced features like the chunking stuff, right? If there's anything the caller needs to do to support those or not. And maybe that's, that could live in a per call thing, or that could be part of the constructor, right? In which case we're dealing with pluggable configuration in some way, right? And because we're sort of putting it on the user, kind of the model I think we're gonna, I think we're leaning toward here, and there's no necessarily consensus on this, is we start with Dapper, right? And wrap it in this bubble wrap that we're thinking of creating, and then put it on any user where Dapper just doesn't work for them to build their own thing. And so with that would be, they would need to provide their own configuration struct, but then it would be on us to figure out a way for them to like easily plug in the shape of that struct somewhere and how to get that populated, all that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I think I guess I understand what you're saying. So, so what do you think? Like, for starting it off, defining for the argument's sake, any other tool similar to Dapper I can use so that it will be a little easier for me to define that interface. Like when you have two things that you need to wrap around, you can generally make it more easier to define a common interface. So do you have any other alternative?
I would say, like, if possible, 3 things, just in case like the 2 are, 3 gives you a bit more statistical certainty that you didn't just choose 2 correlated libraries that looked at each other. I would tend to look at popularity. Like, I'm familiar with RabbitMQ, so keep wanting to pull that out. Because I know it's like also open source, so it's not going to be like, controversial in any way. We could think about, I don't know which of the cloud providers have the most popular queuing service. Amazon. Popular might not be the best way measure anyway. Weirdest. If one of them does have a weirdest one, just to like stress test the wrapping. I wouldn't necessarily include that one in the final code, right? Just because that's like cloud provider specific. Yeah, so popularity and or weirdness is how I would choose a second candidate.
But maybe we can start with one just so it doesn't get too complicated, like we did with the open telemetry, right? We supported Prometheus at the start, but then I think we have a few other ones now.
Yeah, we don't need to necessarily do the others full bore, but the idea would be to stress test the interface that we're building, right? Because otherwise, if we just have one, and this is, I think, what Jadip was getting at, but like, if we just have one, then our interface could be just copy paste the interface of the library we're using, right? And then if that doesn't line up with the library of something else, then we're stuck, right? So the idea behind more than one is making sure that it's generic.
So okay, so next actionable item for me is to start working with this interface. So for that, should I open an issue or just another design document?
Sorry, what was that? It got a little mumbly and garbled for my
Sorry.
audio at the end.
So the next actionable item is to start with this interface, right? To take this forward.
Yeah, I would say start with the interface, start with designing how the user is going to interact with this stuff, right? And maybe think about how we might want to use it going forward. As I said, I don't know. I don't have a strong stance on how it would be configured initially. Going forward, I do see enforcement actions being a future concern for this library. So the goal is just to make sure, as we're defining the interface, as much as we're looking, beneath the interface to make sure we could support all those libraries, we're also looking above the interface to make sure that the sorts of calls that we want to support are getting created. Hi, Rita. We're talking about abstracting messaging queuing libraries.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So should I just elaborate more on this same design doc? Should I create an issue for it? Should I start another design doc? What's the preference?
Sorry, you got garbled for me at least again.
Sorry. So I was asking, should I create another issue, elaborate more on the same design doc, or start a new design doc? What's the preference for taking this forward?
I'm okay with either personally.
Okay.
Rita, I think the summary for the license linter, because I kind of joined in late too, and let me know if I'm missing anything here. But the idea was we were going to comment out bits of the code that are sourcing irrelevant libraries, such that we're no longer sourcing them, which will pare down the amount of code. There's also going to be a comment for like what base hash we're building off of. That's all I'm aware of. Was there any other discussion?
No, I think that pretty much summarized it. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm context switching. Anyway, I don't want to take up time, but this is why I was saying let's, if y'all can update the notes, that way people can come and read it instead of interrupting.
Sure, I can add the notes for the license lint stuff.
Yeah, I was just adding that.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
And for the pub sub stuff, I think the two highlights I got from that conversation was that Dapper does require a sidecar, and that sidecar is injected via a service that is running on the cluster if a user chooses to install it. I kind of lamented the whole like sidecar model for that. And so went back to your comments last week of, can we wrap it, right? So that people can also like easily fork and add things that they would prefer using if they don't like the sidecar model. Any other things people took away from the pub sub stuff?
Sorry, for the license lint thing, does that mean we are keeping part of the source code? Sounds
Yeah,
like,
I
okay.
think the vision that I have right now for this is we have the shell script verify licenses and as little of the other scripts as possible. Yeah.
Right, so when there is a change in upstream, like, how do we get them?
Yeah, so we can, I suppose, get over the new SHA, and there are some small additions for us, like exempting one library that's already like there's already an exception from CSCF for it. We would just keep those bits for us.
Okay, so kind of similar to like how we do the controller runtime, but significantly
I know,
easier, I think.
I mean, we know that's been a pain, so how do we make sure that doesn't, you know, like, how do we make sure we don't end up having to support another?
I mean, we don't have to take their code, is how we do that.
Like, just basically
Just write our own, yeah.
like a point in time, and then we'll continue to patch that fork, essentially.
Yeah, or we don't have to take it from the start. We can just write our own.
Hmm.
I would expect the license linting code to be a little less, let's call it lively, compared to the controller runtime code.
Right.
Definitely less velocity, yeah.
I feel like that the controller runtime thing is a ticking time bomb.
I think it's already exploded. I don't think we can update it without changing significantly.
So I did a little bit of a controller runtime fork for part of the cell stuff a month or so back. It wasn't, yes, it required a significant overhaul, but that was mostly because the controller runtime library hadn't yet been updated to deal with newer K8s stuff rather than the reverse.
Oh, I see. I think there's a new one that's updated with 26 now.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I think 26 is the latest one, right? The versions are all getting murky. Yeah, 14.1 supports, let me see. They updated Kubernetes. Yeah, 26, yeah. So 14 branch supports 26.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a trivial update, but it like all stopped within the border of controller runtime, if I remember right, or only minorly bled out. And
yeah, ours is, the fork is pretty old now, 0.9 or something like that, I think.
Yeah.
Or 11, yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, if the change in interface affects us, it would have affected us even just upgrading controller runtime, because I don't think we actually expose our forkage out other than to the like add or remove watch call explicitly. Another thing to look out for there, though, is controller runtime is looking at dynamic watches. So it's possible that the fork may no longer be necessary at some point in the future. Like, I'm forgetting, they might not have the ability to wipe the informer cache currently, but I don't know, it's promising that they're looking at the same problem.
Yeah, and then I linked to an issue. So to resolve the hotel dependencies, we'll need to update the 26, and then which corresponds to controller runtime 14, and then that we're gonna have to update the fork.
To use open telemetry?
To update our hotel dependency. So right now we are pinning to specific dependencies in frameworks, and then the gatekeeper gets those from frameworks.
For the
Oh, interesting. Sorry,
go ahead, finish.
So we're unable to import frameworks without downgrading the dependencies.
Oh no, we can render in more frameworks. We just cannot change the pins. Yeah, I think Will did this so it doesn't get out of sync.
I thought this was something to do with OPA rather than controller runtime.
So it is kind of, I think, multiple sort of things. So this is the hotel version. I think it uses a specific version of Kubernetes component base, and then that had a incompatibility. I don't remember now, but that gets resolved in 0.26. And then 0.26, the Kubernetes 0.26 is on the controller runtime 0.14.
All right. So should I upgrade controller runtime? I think particularly it might like unblock doing cell prototypes.
Oh yeah, if you already have the code, yeah, let's try that one. And then they'll also resolve this issue.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be new code because before I was like hacking dependencies of controller runtime to support the cell cap stuff because I couldn't import that code because it was like bleeding edge Kubernetes code at the time.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's the same thing then. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll try to do that this week then.
Push the changes to controller runtime upstream.
No, just update our version of controller. And Oren tried to get it upstream. I think they had.
You got me all excited.
Yeah, this was wishful thinking.
Well, you were like, I'm gonna do this, and I'm like, wait.
Yeah, I mean, let's try it if we can.
Wait, I mean, like, all jokes aside, though, like, I know Oren tried it, but since a lot of things have changed since then, as you said, a lot of the changes are now covered, right? But missing some parts. Is there an issue in container runtime, in the container runtime repo that classifies what we're looking for?
I do not know. I know one of the people working on the cell cap is also interested in the dynamic watch part for the controller runtime. And actually, they're kind of using dynamic watches for controller runtime. So let me talk with them and see.
Great. Yeah. And then maybe between the few projects, we can like devote some time.
That work finally.
Yeah, that would be really great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will add this to our agenda for next week just to kind of make sure we give an update on it. Is that okay?
But then I need to actually follow through.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
I put the PR and then the issue for context. I'll put it on the chat too, in the Google Docs.
25th. Or I get that. Or someone else got it.
You mean we're not going back in time?
If only. I don't know. At some point, I would get unborn.
I thought you were going to say something serious. Nice.
Me? No.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I couldn't find the controller runtime code that we have.
Sorry. Good. I think Sartesh heard you.
I think you asked. You couldn't find the controller runtime fork.
Yeah.
It's under third party. So there's a folder called third dash party. Yeah.
.io.
Yeah, it's under here. Oh, okay. So it looks like ours was 082.
Thanks.
So long ago.
Yeah, they added a lot of versions here.
And yet, we were still able to upgrade K8s.
Well, for how long?
Right. That's
I mean, we
what-
also updated the non-forked version of it. I think that one is on a different version. Yeah, that was
'cause
on 12.
the only thing we fork in controller runtime is we call it the dynamic informer cache. And when we construct the manager, we give it that specific cache rather than the default one. So we just need to satisfy that interface. And what the dynamic informer cache gives us is the ability to add or remove watches at will. And as part of removing, delete the informer cache. So you're able to do dynamic watches and not have memory leaks. And the reason for doing dynamic watches, for y'all who remember this, was it let us get rid of finalizers. Because otherwise, what you wind up doing is creating something like a sub manager that like destroys everything and rebuilds it every time you add watches, which is not only expensive, but you wind up potentially missing changes, right? Particularly deletes, because deletes are often inferred, right? This object used to exist, but now it doesn't, therefore I should remove it from my internal stuff. And the way to prevent that is either to not wipe your cache, your informer cache, so you could do the inferred deletes, or to put finalizers everywhere. And the finalizers did not work well.
All right, do we want to talk about the next topic? I know Alex wanted to talk about it for a few weeks now, so.
Enforcement actions? Yeah, we touched on it last week. I added a couple examples. To be honest, I was a bit confused because most of what you were asking for appeared to like already be in the design doc, like the examples of having different sets of enforcement actions per namespace, right? Was I think that something you had highlighted. I did add an example of like a custom enforcement point string. I'm not saying I thought that was necessarily a great format for it, but it's just a possible format for it. We could figure out if there's a better convention.
So for example, thank you for adding the example, like, for example, like the cube system one makes sense, right? Like you added it under match, but not having it means everywhere is excluded. That wasn't, enforce everywhere. Oh, okay.
Which one are we talking about? 4?
This is 4, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to see like where do you put the exclusion? Like, do you put it at the match level or do you put it at the action level?
Is it the match level? Like matching does matching, right?
Mhm.
And action just does whatever action.
Mhm.
And what the difference between 4 and 5 is you either keep our current paradigm where you have one match per constraint, which is 4, or with 5, you're able to have multiple sets of match criteria with enforcement action next to it, right? Which, basically it takes those two constraints and lets you like squish them together, provided they have the same parameters. 5 is a little bit more opinionated, right? Like it says, here is how we expect you to use multiple constraints. Like it does devolve into 4 if you only have one item in the list. And in 5 also would be a pretty fundamental schema change, right? Like remember, we're not operating in a void. We would need to do things in a backwards compatible way. right? And 4 is just readily, transparently backwards compatible. Well, except for pre-existing enforcement action. 5 is, you'd need backwards compatibility not only for enforcement action, but also match, right? Because now it's part of the list.
So it looks like 4 and 5, the difference is like multiple, kind of like multiple constraints versus one single constraint. That does a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, literally speaking, 5 is a single constraint, right? And 4 is multiple constraints. But I think what you're saying is 5 is multiple constraints wrapped in one.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's the sort of greenfield difference. But this is the implications of that in terms of like backwards compatibility, and also in terms of figuring out whether we're taking a stance on how constraints should be used that we'll regret later, is worth thinking about.
Right. So 4 is closer to what we have today. And I mean, even with 5, right? Like you could, well, I could create another constraint that does, right? Nothing.
Yeah, 5 you could turn into 4 just by saying my lists only have one entry.
Yeah.
I honestly, the other thing to think about here would be if we went with 4, because the salient difference between 4 and 5 is 5 bundles 2 like things into one. If it turns out there's like a super pattern we can recognize where people tend to cluster a bunch of constraints together, maybe that's a separate primitive we could look at, right? Like, it's a terrible name, but meta constraint, right? Where you write it once and it stamps out 5 constraints for you in practice. And there we're specifically thinking about problem spaces where people would use multiple constraints, something like rollouts, right? Where they want to gradually phase in enforcement, let's say, would be one example. Kind of struggling to think of other examples of meta constraint. There must be. Feel like we kind of encounter them every so often, where we say, well, the answer is 2 constraints.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I guess you had a comment below about the cell cap imperatives, like, oh sorry, primitives. Isn't the cell cap today, isn't it kind of like the constraint as well? Like it's there's like the policy and then the binding, right? So it's pretty much like the template and the constraint, right?
Yeah, so the reason why I specifically called that out is I think there were earlier examples where we're dynamically figuring out the enforcement action based off of the content of the resource under test. And it's not that that's impossible to do, right? Like if we can project out a single constraint into multiple cell primitives, then you could like recreate that branching logic, but that's a really specific condition, right? So maybe it's easier to approach it from the cell perspective. So if you look at the cell cap for, there's Joe Betts has proposals for enforcement action now that are under review. So if you have opinions, definitely leave comments. Where it looks a lot like constraints, where in the binding object, which is essentially the match, it's everything but parameters for a constraint is kind of how I think of it. You specify, I forget the naming, but enforcement action in the binding, and enforcement action is a static string, right? So let's pretend we come up with a design where enforcement action, you just plug in some rego and it should spew out an enforcement action. Like that's very powerful in the sense of, well, then you can like pass whatever into it and rego can look at the time of day and give a different enforcement action, all that stuff. But the problem is that that doesn't map onto the cell cap, right? Because the cell cap, there's no way to do all that fancy logic. So basically anything that uses that is going to live in the webhook. And so that does not map onto the cell cap, right? Because we can't statically look at it and go, okay, we need to create these cell objects.
So then option 4 is better from that perspective, right?
I think, yeah, option 5, just as it folds out into multiple implied constraints, you know, can fold out into multiple implied cell objects. I think option 4 is less risky for the backwards compatibility bit, and it doesn't try to solve the multi-constraint problem, which feels to me like there's something more generic. And I don't know whether that's something built on top of Gatekeeper or like that meta constraint kind of thing I was talking about. In any case, if we're leaning toward 5, I would look for other places where we say the solution is multiple constraints and see if we're jiving, like we're addressing those as well. Yeah, so I think either 4 or 5 would work. I haven't looked back on 1 or 2 to try to map in a while, to be honest. Let's see. Introduce new enforcement action list to specify intended enforcement actions, and then audit as a new enforcement act. So for there, some enforcement actions, and this is true for all, like there's going to be enforcement actions that the cell cap just doesn't understand. That's fine, I think. Like as long as we could say to the user, if you keep it to these enforcement actions that the cell cap can do, then we can use the cell cap. If not, obviously, like what do you want us to do? Like we're adding value as a webhook at that point.
Would it make sense to start with actions instead of actions? Seems like that's the only difference, but we can limit to 1.
Start with that. So if we like, are you talking about like what we currently have today, where we just let users say a single enforcement action?
So I was trying to looking at the option 5 versus 4, right? And in option 5, there is actions, which is like there could be multiple actions in there. But in 4, there's only a single action. Could we start with instead of actions being in array, and then we could only have 1 for now, but in later, if we wanted to turn it into like a option 5, we could do that easily instead of like being stuck.
Oh, sorry. I see between 4 and 5 for like.
Seems that's the main difference, right? Otherwise, it's the same thing exists. Oh, I guess the match is on the same level as actions. I see.
Yeah, that's it. Because enforcement action, you actually do get in 4 a list of multiple possible actions.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, the other bird we're trying to kill with that stone, sorry, but for that metaphor, but is having space for configuring the enforcement action, right? And PubSub was a target use case for this. Right. So like the billing team or whatever, it can make sure that violations get sent to the billing PubSub queue, in which case they'll need to provide at a minimum the name of the queue, maybe some other metadata around it as well. And also there was a concern, if I remember right, we were looking to address the idea that or a want a user had where, hey, like, I only want this constraint to be enforced for audit, right? Or I think in this case they only wanted it enforced on the webhook. They didn't want it enforced in audit. And so is there some way that I could put something on the constraint such that audit doesn't even try to evaluate it, so it doesn't take up CPU cycles, right? And enforcement action was a potential way of doing that, right? And so the other thing here with this design is because we list out the enforcement points, essentially we are able to say, well, hey, I'm the audit enforcement point. Does any enforcement action match me? If not, then this constraint is irrelevant. I'll drop it, right? Before I evaluate the contents. Like just don't ingest that constraint. And in order to do that, you need to have something like excluded enforcement points. Yeah, I don't think you need a list necessarily for that, but you do need an object because you need enforcement points, excluded enforcement points. Did that answer your question? I feel like I just threw a bunch of context in more than.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to, in my head, I'm thinking about like the scenarios, but it makes sense.
I think you should look at the last example in option 4. That one has, at least that's the one that works for me. That has like everything. Because it's one match and multiple actions. And each action can have an exclusion of enforcement points. Wow, that's a lot.
Enforcement point. I mean, why would you do an excluded? That part I am a little hesitant.
This is only if you have wildcards, I guess.
Yeah, why would you do a wildcard and exclude? Why don't you just like say?
Well, so that's the audit example, right? So let's say, and honestly, I kind of disagree with this user's point. Like I would exclude on the webhook before audit, right? Because webhook is latency sensitive. But yeah, let's say you had a super expensive constraint to evaluate. Let's say it took 2 seconds to evaluate this constraint for whatever reason. And you didn't want to run that constraint in a webhook because that's a lot of latency for a webhook, right? But you're fine running it in audit because you're fine waiting, and you're fine running it on Gator, right? Because you're fine waiting on your CI/CD as well. So what you would want is you'd want deny, right? And you say, actually, I want everything to deny this, except don't run this on the webhook, right? So the star, what that lets you do is it lets you say, I don't know where I'm necessarily running this constraint, but just run it everywhere, right? And then the excluded bit would be, okay, but I do know that I have a webhook enforcement point and I do not want it to be run there. The star could be implicit. That's, I think, a fair point. But I think that in terms of defaulting, if you have that implicit behavior, it's also nice to provide a linguistic thing you could put in so that users can make it explicit if they want that default value.
I think to start, we should not do wildcard. Wildcard is always tricky, and we may not have considered all the corner cases. We could always add wildcard later.
Yeah.
Not that many points, enforcement points today, so we maybe just ask people to list them out.
I mean, if we are not having a wildcard in enforcement point, do we need the excluded enforcement points?
Then no.
Well, yeah, that's a question I think of whether we're looking to, with this MVP, address
Right.
this concern of don't run this constraint in specific places, right?
Right.
If we're not looking to address that, then we don't need targeted, like, any of that stuff.
I mean, the users can just put it in the enforcement points.
Well, no, I think that, wait, I thought your proposal.
Sorry, the enforcement point is, I'm a little confused because in the previous example, enforcement points is an array.
Yeah, sorry, just assume it's an array for all of these.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so then it's kind of like the config exclusion, right? It's an array, and then so users just don't say audit in there, right?
Yeah.
So same effect, but we basically remove star.
Yeah, like, well, so the reason to have things targeted by enforcement point would be to have the ability to do this exclude, as I was talking about, but also to have the ability to take different actions per enforcement point, right? So I come back to the notion of, let's say you want to deny for Gator, right? But you want to warn for the webhook because it's like a new policy and you don't want to break your cluster if something happens to live there, but you do want to prevent new code from being added that violates the policy, right? That would be another use case that would require targeting enforcement points and excluded enforcement points. But if we're like not comfortable with having this targeting out of the box, right? And we want to defer it, and we know our syntax has room, then we could do that. Though, to be honest, at that point, I'm not sure there's much value in having multiple enforce. Oh, no. Okay, so you get value if we're looking at PubSub, right? Like you have everything taking the same actions, but you're able to much more explicitly configure those actions, right? And we also give ourselves room to not, like, right now we're inventing a new keyword for every like imaginable set of like enforcement actions that people can do, right? Like, what's the difference between dry run and, let's say we have ignore and blah blah blah. So if we allow people to sort of compose them on their own, yeah,
Yeah. So like a default today would be, let's say you didn't have namespace exclusion, let's say, you would just have two actions like deny and audit, right? Sorry. You would have deny and what is audit? Audit is not an action. Audit is
no, yeah, deny and dry run and warn.
That's not.
So I mean, that's the issue. There's no way to disable audit. I mean, this is how it started.
Well, and audit is really just audit denying, right? And the webhook not doing anything.
I think that's gonna create a lot of confusion because today we have enforcement actions, right? And we've been saying that's deny, audit. Sorry, we've been saying that's deny, dry run, and warn, right?
Well,
So
we could keep
we
deny,
never
dry run,
really
and
explicitly
warn.
call out audit anywhere, actually.
Is your question about action deny in here? Like this piece? I don't know if you can see it, but I'm highlighting. This is confusing because if is deny an action? Like, is audit going to be an action?
No, I guess audit is not an action from this proposal.
Yeah, audit sounds like an enforcement point, but not an action.
Right.
What are so like excluding the PubSub and logs, what are the possible actions today?
Right. So the things that we do right now, right, are, and let's break it down by enforcement point, because that's really the thing we're coupling that we would no longer be coupling, and might make things clearer. So if we are Gator, right, the deny action is pretty simple. We say, well, if there's at least one deny, then we should have a non-zero return code and print out a message, right? If it's worn, I think what that would look like is we should print out a message but have a 0 return code. And then if it's dry run, do nothing. Or maybe it's the same as worn, right?
I think the do nothing is probably the answer there, because Warren prints a message, dry run doesn't.
But the point there is that
Right.
because Gator is Gator, right, and it knows, hey, I'm running in a shell and I have shell-like options for me.
Mhm.
It's deciding the actual significance of
Right.
that.
So Gator would be an action, right, in here?
No, Gator would be an enforcement point.
Gator would be
Right.
okay. What about the action for Gator? So do
Deny
we still
or-
deny dry run and warm?
Right. Well,
But
so-
then that doesn't map to the audit.
sorry, audit
So like
is
if we say deny in here, but then the enforcement point is audit, that doesn't make sense.
so that
Maybe I'll
So
just put it in here so it's clear.
there's a couple of things. Like one, deny should be like the default enforcement action, I think, and deny just means do your default whatever you do, right? And so for
This sort of way. So like forget these exist, all the pops up and stuff.
so here's the problem.
Oh,
is
sorry,
that
deny. Sorry.
audit is not an enforcement action.
Oh, sorry, I changed deny. Sorry, my bad. I took mistake.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because audit, I mean, it just like linguistically makes sense, right? Like auditing is not, audit is the process of scanning and then reporting.
Right.
stuff,
But
right?
audit is not a deny either.
Right, and what we do currently with audit is we just, whenever we see an enforcement action, we write out an audit result and say here's the enforcement action associated with that result.
Peter, are
Actually,
you
we don't even
doing a hand wave?
I think what I'm hearing from both of you is I think what you are identifying is not all actions apply to all enforcement points.
Right.
And so so we need a good way to sort of make that more intuitive, because if we are saying it's many to many, it's going to be very confusing from a UX perspective.
Yeah. I think we need like a bread and butter enforcement action that everyone should support in some way, right? Whether we call that deny or violation or whatever, that just says like, do your main thing, right? So for Gator test, return 1. For webhook, deny. For audit, report a thing.
What about default?
Yeah.
No, that's not intuitive. Like, what the hell is default?
I don't know.
Yeah, but
it almost
So
sounds
like,
like
it
almost
defaults to the enforcement points default. I don't know.
what I'm hearing from you though is each enforcement point has maybe a given set of actions that it can do. Right. So it's almost like the points are the parent and and the way it is written right now, it's almost saying actions are the parent and all enforcement points share the same action, which may not be the case. Right.
Yeah, from a practical perspective, I think there is like the most common use case is going to be like, I don't care what the actual action is. I just know there's a violation, and I know that I want all of my enforcement points to do their thing, and I don't want to like keep track of all the enforcement points that I'm using, right? Just in case like I add one, I want to get that enforcement for free. So just like do a thing. So that was like my base case that I was working off of. But I think that the point is well taken that it is true that one, that default action doesn't look the same across all enforcement points, and two, different enforcement points will have different things they can do.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty confusing.
We are like way over 22
Yeah.
minutes. Can we, and I honestly don't think we can solve it right now. Can we all think about this more? I think what it is, right, like what's in the proposal may not be as intuitive as we would like it to be. Sounds like. So
Yeah.
let's go back to the drawing board and think of other options.
Yeah, it's.
I think
Yeah.
if we can remove action from here, that would simplify things. And just rely on enforcement points.
But like webhook would have different actions. That's the point, right? Whereas audit may not make sense to have different actions. Like, I don't know, like for audit, I
Could
don't know.
it be like I don't know, this is I'm making up stuff.
Like
Webhook
data-
/ deny or something like that?
But what about then pub
Or
sub?
like,
You know?
yeah, pub sub could be multiple actions. So
something like that. Webhook / pub sub. Again, this is I'm just thinking out loud. And then we could do like a star thing for everything. I don't know.
no stars. Stars are
Again, in the future, like yeah,
That's,
I don't know what is for audit. Like
so that starts to look to me honestly like the same thing, just in a different format, right?
Yeah.
Like, is there
I think it's the action that makes it kind of confusing in here because like deny and audit doesn't make sense.
But again, not all enforcement points share the same action.
Right.
So that's the problem. So the way it is right now, it's basically saying they share the same actions.
I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that last point. Like it might look that way just from the syntax. There might be ways to document that. And definitely there should be.
This
Well,
should just be intuitive enough that you don't need to read docs.
Yeah.
so there's a tension, I think, between intuitive and extensible in particularly this case, right?
I mean, don't get me wrong, we need docs regardless, right? It's a change in what we have today, but
Yeah.
still.
But I think we need a simple case that most people use. They don't need docs. But for advanced cases, sure, maybe.
Like yeah, and if we have like just, as I said, bread and butter enforcement actions where if you stick to these, it works.
Did we lose Max?
Stop.
I think it froze. Oh, another screenshot time.
I think this is Zoom's way of telling us y'all need to get out of here. This horse is dead. You
I have some really good screenshot of Anish. Hopefully, I'll be able to use it as a meme, like from Teams.
I don't know. I don't think we can figure this out just like sitting here. So
Yeah. Okay. Let's think about this. Yeah. I mean, I think right now it's very confusing because of the multiple things and there's like a combinations.
honestly,
To apply, don't apply.
the way it is now, I think I actually prefer what we have today. What we have
Yeah.
today is actually simpler.
Yeah. I mean, I had a few other things. Obviously, this doesn't like it's not complicated as these ones. So like we could just add like a thing that just disables audit.
All right. I have to go. So let's just drop and yeah. I don't know if Max is coming back, but yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to you guys later. Bye.
So, thank you. Bye bye.